This is One-on-One. We're pleased to be joined by Dr. Jody J. Foster, MD, MBA, also the author of The Schmuck in My Office and clinical professor of psychiatry at University of Pennsylvania. What a great title. A, where does the title come from? B, what are you trying to accomplish here?
The title comes from the fact that probably 80 to 85% of the consults I get start with, Jody, I should have called you 10 years ago. I have a schmuck in my department. I have a jerk in my office. And people get so frustrated because they've waited to intervene. And by the time they call me, there's so much affect on top of the consult that that's what I get.
Now, it's interesting. We had to check with our team, our folks at PBS, could we use that word? And I said, yes, you can use it. But clarify, is a schmuck a jerk and that's it?
Well, the literal Yiddish translation is something quite different.
I do know that.
Right.
I'm Italian, but I know that. The literal translation is what it is, but there are different types of schmucks, are there not? Go ahead.
So I've been doing this work with disruptive people in the office for quite some time.
When the air quotes come.
And what I've learned is that barring major mental or physical illness, all of these anecdotes, all of these situations related to interpersonal conflict fall into the same 10 buckets over and over and over again. And I'm not saying they fall cleanly into the 10 buckets. Such as, so I renamed these buckets from their psychiatric terminology to make it extra clear that I don't think these people are psychiatrically ill or compromised. These are just traits. So narcissus, which is relatively self-explanatory.
So, okay, someone in the office, okay, you're dealing with a particular problem in the office. You go to a colleague, or the colleague's aware of it. Or is what you're talking about, doctor, that the colleague comes to you and says, let me tell you about my situation. Let me tell you how I dealt with that. Oh, you think you have it bad, I have it worse. Am I oversimplifying it?
You mean for the narcissist character?
Everything's about them.
So yeah, I mean, the basic premise is that they're incredibly entitled, they're incredibly self-centered, they have an incredibly limited ability to empathize or see a situation from another person's viewpoint. They tend to have a my way or the highway attitude, and they tend to require constant praise to fan their ego.
Could some of these people ever be elected to high office in this country?
It's possible.
It is possible, though.
Well, what happens is that because this character can be exceedingly charismatic, that in fact they often get promoted or over-promoted.
Or become CEO?
Possibly, yes.
Now, that person, why is that person dangerous?
Well, that person is dangerous not only because often the thing that is making them so charismatic is sort of filled with air. What I like to say is that the narcissistic ego is actually very small. There's a dichotomy between the actual ego and then the ego that's presented to the world. And so it's almost like you take a peanut-sized ego and you drop it in a balloon, and then you blow that balloon up, and that's that person you're seeing. So the person's ego fills the room. And you know, you can't get a word in, they're so big. They fill the room with themselves. But the balloon analogy is a good one because balloons are inherently fragile and easy to pop, and they're right size to that peanut again. So in a CEO situation, let's say a CEO has been very successful, but then they take the company public and it fails, that narcissistic injury, there's another air quote, sorry, is...
You get 3 a segment, go ahead.
That narcissistic injury is potentially dangerous for them because they might become so wounded and so depressed that you know, these are when you hear stories of CEOs who actually harm themselves.
That's right.
But
because they can't imagine themselves, and I interrupt them. You know,
but by the same token, in having only their own perspective and only their own agenda at the forefront, it's not necessarily good for the company.
Another kind of schmuck is, did you say a bean counter?
Absolutely.
Why would a bean counter, I mean, I have to make sure that we stay within budget. I'm very aware of those things. So am I a schmuck because of that?
No, it's a really good point. A lot of these characters that get into trouble, some of the basic premises are really important and really good. For example, you want to have a healthy core of narcissism.
Fiscal responsibility?
No, but you want to have a healthy core of narcissism so that you feel good enough about yourself to put yourself on television or whatever it is.
What are you trying to say?
But by the same token, the bean counter, I mean, it's great to be a detail person.
Yes.
It's great to be reliable. But when the underlying anxiety is, I have to control everything, to the extent of, I have to control the vicissitudes of life, and I then control your work, and I micromanage you, and I correct everything you do over and over and over again. Eventually, I rip it up and do it myself, because only I can do it right. that's a problem.
And that person wreaks chaos
Absolutely.
around him or her.
Yes.
What do most other people do, doctor, when they are experiencing? By the way, they can't. Often people say, "Well, get away from that person." And how are you going to get away from the person? They're in the next cubicle. You report to that person. Not so easy.
To your prior point, a lot of these characters sometimes get over-promoted, and particularly the bean counter, because they are detail people. And so you might have a visionary CEO who says, I need a detail guy. And so they promote or woman, of course. And so they promote the bean counter to a management role, where they're just so stuck in the weeds that they really can't effectively do that.
So here's my question. How do most people in business and in life deal with this quote-unquote schmuck who is wreaking havoc around this person? Like, do we confront it right head on? Do we deal with it? Hey, listen, we need to talk. Or what do they do?
So that's a lot of the point of the book is that there is the intervention in the moment when something happens that's upsetting, and then there's the dealing with the person in an ongoing way. And if a upsetting or difficult event occurs, then yes, I absolutely advocate that you intervene early, you call out what you see when you see it, and that when you tell someone that what they did was upsetting to you.
For example, break it down a little bit. Concrete example.
Somebody screams at me in front of my peers in the office. That embarrasses me, that humiliates me, and it makes me feel anxious and less productive at work. I would want to be able to go back to that person and say, I understand that you were upset with me about X, Y, or Z, but the way that you conveyed it to me and the public nature in which you did it made it twice as upsetting, and it was making me feel very embarrassed around my peers.
So there's a place to do that.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I've made mistakes and have raised my voice and dealt with situations with an individual. There are others around. I knew it was a mistake. Just about everyone has called me on it. But what's the difference between that and a schmuck in your book, number one? And number two, more complicated question, what's the longer-term solution?
Well, so if people are telling you in the moment, you just yelled and it upset everyone, and you can self-correct, well, then I'd say you're not being a schmuck at all. I'd say you're someone who made a mistake and can correct that mistake.
What do most schmucks do?
But, the types of people who really upset others, particularly let's take the narcissist example, and again, there's 10 of these, but narcissist comes up a lot. It's always somebody else's fault.
It's not me.
Right. It's, and there's absolutely no capacity to be on the other side of the equation and to see how what he or she did might have felt. And so a strategy, sometimes you have to say, well, imagine if I yelled at you in front of other people, and literally it's like taking someone's hand and walking them to the scenario.
Wow.
Because they don't naturally go there. And the other thing about this, and the reason that intervention is so important, is because so many of us are just functioning the way we function. We're bringing our personalities to work with us, and they work in different, parts of the world. And we don't always know that we're upsetting other people. And so if you don't tell people, if you don't lay out the rules of engagement, people often are like, I didn't know that was a problem. And of course I'll stop.
The other one, Georgette, what was the other one you said? Is a flytrap? What, is that a type of schmuck?
So again, having named these all myself, yeah, it's a
Pretty
type.
creative.
It's a type of one of my. And the reason I named this the flytrap is because this is a character that's very seductive and very appealing, and they suck you in, and eventually they spit you out. And so this is a character type that's really defined by overvaluing you, being really intense, making you feel great, putting you on a pedestal, and then. You'll find that there's this sticky push-pull to the relationship, and eventually it's going to cycle down. And because that's the nature of the personality. And it will flip on its side. Have you ever seen the movie Fatal Attraction? That's a very pathological example.
Glenn Close.
Correct. That's a very pathological example of what I would call a flytrap.
That's an extreme example.
Yes.
You're not always going to get the rabbit in the,
You're not always, but you'd be surprised how much of the sort of surrounding activity you do get in the office. And again, these are people who you find that you have to walk on eggshells around them because you're absolutely afraid you're going to set them off.
That's freakish. Well, before I let you go, best advice you have for people. By the way, go out and get the book, read it, find out more. Best advice for people dealing with it right now.
So, best advice.
I know the situation matters. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No. There are some general principles. And one is that you really need to accept and internalize the fact that people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a jerk in the office today. People don't set out to do this. It's not driven by malice. People are just being themselves. We all have personality traits. We all have texture. Otherwise, we'd all be beige and there'd be, nothing that
That's right.
differentiated us. And so understand that when something upsetting happens, first examine yourself. Is it my issue that I found this upsetting because the person next to me wasn't bothered by it at all? Or if something happened, before you kind of jump to something, say, why did it happen? What's the underlying dynamic or anxiety that made this person do this? And then most importantly, call it out early, be direct, be concise, don't dance around what you have to say, and make it better like that.
Final point I'll make here is people struggle with quote-unquote difficult conversations. These are difficult but absolutely necessary conversations because without getting on a soapbox, I'll often say, what's the alternative?
Right.
Because you continue to live with that. You have no one to blame but yourself.
And I would argue that if you keep collecting little victories by having these conversations, you'll get more and more bravery to keep doing it, and you'll make your work life and general life much better.
Dr. Jody J. Foster, the author of The Schmuck in My Office, clinical professor of psychiatry at University of Pennsylvania. Powerful stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was great.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by Montclair State University, PSE&G, the New Jersey Education Association, Delta Dental of New Jersey, Choose New Jersey, the New Jersey Re-Entry Corporation, and by the law firm of Gibbons PC. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been produced in partnership with TriStar Studios.